Welcome into another episode of Gorilla Sports Off Ice. I'm Jesse Montano. She is Meghan Angley, and we are brought to you guys by our great friends over at Trusted American Mortgage. Trusted Americans, salary-based mortgage consultants, want to help you get into a better interest rate and lower your monthly payment. Go to trustedamerican.com right now to see how much money they can help you save today. Hello and welcome in.
Please do not leave your luggage unattended on the station.
Welcome to the show. Yes, hello, welcome to the show. Friday afternoon, Gorilla Sports Off Ice. Jesse Montano, Meghan Angley with you. We got Thomas behind the glass today, making sure that everything goes off without a hitch. Meghan was feeling, I don't know, a little under the weather, so we operate out of an abundance of caution. And by we operate out of an abundance of caution, I mean I yell at people when they come into the office sick, so I told Meghan just to stay home. Meghan, how are you doing? How are you feeling?
Yeah, I don't feel too bad overall, but I'm definitely battling some kind of a bug, so I don't want to get anybody sick.
Meghan's day to day with the rumbly tumblies. I don't know, the not feeling good. 5-game homestand for the Avs. Felt like kind of a long homestand by the end of it, given the way that it went. Avs are heading out on the road for 3 straight games on the East Coast. We're going to unpack a little bit of what we saw out of this homestand, what we liked, what we didn't like, what was frustrating about the inconsistencies. We'll talk a little bit about the importance of this road trip that they've got coming up against 3 teams that they really should beat. That you know, the Avs need to be looking to come out of this trip on the positive end of things. And then we're going to talk a little bit about Miles Wood and something that he told you yesterday, Meghan, at practice, with what started as you asking a relatively simple question about his return to play that actually turned into a little bit more info than maybe we were expecting. But Meghan, let's start with what was a disappointing 5-game homestand for the Avs. They end up going 2-2-1, pulling 5 points out of a possible 10. But this just really isn't the team that is going to be satisfied with a 500 split. And when you stack on top of the fact that they played games against the Dallas Stars, Minnesota Wild, and Winnipeg Jets, and only came out with 3 points in those games, it just kind of adds to it. Taking a step back now, a couple days removed, what were your kind of overall thoughts about what was an inconsistent homestand?
Well, I think inconsistent is a great word for it, and I even extend the inconsistency out more games to this 10-game segment here recently. I think there's frustration in the highs and lows of the results. And I give them credit for the Winnipeg Jets game recently. I think process-wise, they did a lot of the right things, and they made adjustments from one game to the next, and they just didn't get the result. So I'm not going to come down too hard on them for that one, but I go back to the New York game at home that started it all, and even though they get the 2 points in that one, the process wasn't where I'd like to see it. And when I think in terms of what a common thread between the inconsistencies from game to game might be, there really isn't one thing. And it's not like there's any singular person or line that I'm blaming for the inconsistencies. It just is a matter of how important it is to thrive in Bednar's system, that everybody's doing the right things pretty much every shift. No shifts off kind of a thing. And I think that was a struggle for them in this last 10-game segment. And as you mentioned, with important division points on the line, especially in closing it out, I think that's what left a little bit of a bitter taste. Like, this will be among the 10-game segments, probably one of my least favorites, because in the games that they won, they showed what they were capable of. And so I'm not blaming a depleted lineup or goaltending. And I think that's a great place in the season to be, where these things are fixable with
Yep.
buy-in. It's not as dire as it was when we were looking at the goaltending situation and saw no end in sight. But
Mhm.
it's also kind of the time for no more excuses.
Right. You and I in the locker room actually talked to Ross Colton a couple days ago about exactly that. And how do you start to shift that mindset of you are in the back half of the year and you do need to start finding the consistency. And he touched on a lot of the things that you just talked about. And I'm with you. The 2-2-1 wasn't the issue that I had with the homestand. It was how wildly different this Avalanche team looked from one game to the next, both in positive and negative directions. You know what I mean? Like there was games where, take that New York game, for example, they look terrible. They get the result they want. And then a couple nights later against Dallas, they come out and have a really good effort, start to finish, and get up on a Dallas Stars team and then kind of put a Dallas Stars team away. Dallas tried to mount a little bit of a comeback. The Avs squashed it. And you sit there and say, yes, this process right here is what we expect from this team. And that is the part to me that was, I don't even know if concerning is the right word, but just unacceptable maybe.
I look at the Edmonton game. You waste a monster 2-goal Nathan MacKinnon game, and you get the Logan O'Connor goal too. You get the depth goal, you get the star going. At that point,
Yep.
then it should be the formula for success. Like quite literally what the Avs formula for success relies on, whether it be depth scoring or getting your back end going on the goal share in some way, as well as a little bit of contributions from the top. When you rely on just one of those things, you usually see none of them come through. And
Yeah.
so that was maybe what was frustrating about the Edmonton result. And that's an Edmonton team on the second leg of a back-to-back. And they came in on the heels of a loss that they were pretty disappointed in. So they had something to prove themselves. But I think that makes it a little bit frustrating, disappointing, unacceptable, the word that you just used.
So I'm going to take a little detour here over to the comments section because there's two comments that just came through that I want to discuss. This one right here. Can you guys discuss Middlestat in greater detail? Can this even be considered a slump anymore? Does this game not fit with how the Avs want to play? I think this is a great question. I think this is still a slump. And the reason I think that is because we've seen Casey Middlestat fit into this style of play at different points, even just within the last year. But I think it's a fair question because it has gone on long enough where we've been waiting for him to break out of it and get back to that form that we saw at the beginning of the season. And it just hasn't happened. So I just maybe like your thoughts on this. Like I said, I still consider this to be, he's off his game and he can get back to it. But this has gone on long enough that I do think that this is at least a fair criticism of Middlestat. Agree, disagree?
Yeah, no, this is still considered a slump. And I went back and looked at like the total number of games that he played last year following the deadline into the playoffs, where we saw a version of Middlestat that fit this team extremely well. And it's a little more bad than we've seen good at this point, but it's still pretty close. You know, the games that separate the bad from the good, because the opening 10 games of this year, I included in the good. You know, I deducted from the bad of this season. And his points per game in the playoffs was pretty outstanding. It's an important time for a player who's never had a taste of NHL playoffs to shine. And he's fit in well with a lot of the players that we've wanted to see him playing with more this year that have rotated in and out of the lineup. Now, that's where this is a slump. He has had opportunities to play with some of those players, like a Nichushkin, a Druin, or a Lehkonen. It just has sort of still been a revolving door. I'm not blaming the inconsistencies for this slump, though. I still see a player whose confidence is being rehabilitated from a pretty shattered place. And this homestand specifically might be where there's been a little bit of optimism because of the success he found with Duren and Lehkonen briefly. And I know that line was broken up. And I look at the game against Minnesota, and you know, they have the good Dallas game and the bad Minnesota game. And the things that were bad about that line and that night that warranted it being broken up I don't think fall on Casey Middlestat's shoulders alone. Their possession game changed. It was solid 5v5 in the Dallas game and a vulnerability in the Wild game. But that was true of the whole team. Colorado, usually a strong possession team controlling time in the ozone, just didn't do that against the Wild. So it affected lines 1 through 4. I think Lehkonen and Middlestat found a little bit of something that worked, but in that Wild game, everybody was bobbling pucks, and there was hesitancy that crept back into Middlestat's game a little bit. And so to call it a slump, I think is fair. But when I measure the good with the bad, they're still pretty close to where it's tough. Like, they do need a more reliable solution, but I don't know that is still like the time to hit the button to trade Casey Middlestat, because you have to be careful. You know, I see trade talks. They're starting to ramp up just generally around the Avs right now. And I think that's fair to some degree, but you can't just nuke a team every deadline either. There is a component of bringing new people into the fold and a new gamble then of, will this person fit? And Casey once fit. And so there's still the risk of somebody new coming in, maybe showing promise early. And then if their confidence takes a hit, then they're slumping. It's just a bit of a risk to imagine shipping Casey out at this time that I don't think we're there yet. I think we're close to that point of time with Casey Middlestat, but I don't think we're there yet. I think it would be a mistake and more of a risk to move on from him right now. I completely we're moving closer.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you up, but I completely agree with you. I do think that we forget he hasn't even quite been here a year yet. We've seen the good flashes, and that's what leads. And hey, I get it. I'm not criticizing anybody who's frustrated with where Casey Middlestat is at. But I do think this is a high end player, has a lot of upside, is still young, and is someone that the Avs can mold into the type of player they want him to be. I think he's bought in. I think he's working hard. Him and Nathan McKinnon get along great. I think with enough runway here, Casey Middlestat's not only going to get back on track, but really turn into the player that they want him to be. But no doubt about it, this slump has gone on way longer than any of us expected. And I'm not going to criticize anyone who's critical of Casey Middlestat and saying, hey, maybe is it time for the Avs to look somewhere else? I'm not going to tell you that you're not justified in thinking that way. I'm with you, Megan. I believe that he needs a little bit more runway to move into the player that he wants to be. And then this is one, not specific to this road trip or homestand, but when are we going to start talking about CMAC and the pro scout team? And then a follow-up from Kevin here. Ryjo and Tatar were failures. Middlestat is looking like a reach is 2C. DeHaan, Ludwig, Shillington are meh. Kelly has been fine, but it feels like the hit on pros is 1 of 3. So I've got 2 things here. And I appreciate Kevin reaching out because, again, like I think the list you lay out there, I can understand the argument. But I couldn't disagree with you more, Kevin. Look, I think Chris McFarland, I'll circle back to him in a second because I know you and I have had this conversation before, Megan. I don't think Chris McFarland quite gets enough credit for the impact and the fingerprints of his that are all over this roster and all over that banner that's hanging in the rafters at Ball Arena from 3 years ago. But as far as the pro scouting department goes, the Avs pro scouting has actually been their secret weapon to building what has turned into a perennial cup contender. They have been able to identify players from all over the place that have turned into highly effective pieces for the Avalanche. Val Nichushkin, of course, being the poster child for that. Arturi Lehkonen being the other one that really is, you could argue, is a diamond in the rough. Ross Colton has fit in really well here. I think underselling Parker Kelly as fine in terms of his fit and the way he plays is way underselling it. Now, look, Ryjo and Tatar, I think Ryan Johansson made a lot of sense until he got to town and we all realized that his game had fallen off a cliff. What I actually like about the Tomas Tatar thing that I don't think Chris McFarland gets enough credit for was something that they signed a player who scored 30 goals in this league to come in and help bolster that depth. When they realized he couldn't do it, they moved on. They didn't waste any time. They pivoted away from that right away and got an asset in return for it. look, I still have faith in Casey Middlestat as the 2C. I think that's a player that they identified that makes a lot of sense. DeHaan, Ludwig, Shillington, look, those are all guys that you were bringing in to see who could be the 6th/7th D. There was never really great expectations for those players. But like I said, I can understand when you look at Johansson and Tatar, how you can go that way. But the Avs pro scouting and being able to identify players on the fly that fit into this system, this organization systematically, I think has actually been one of their great strengths in remaining a consistent contender at the top of the league. And I get it. Chris McFarland was moved into that official GM role a couple seasons ago. And so people are judging him based on what he's done in these last 2 years. But if you ask Joe Sakic, Chris McFarland was had a massive role in the front office and in the way that this organization operated in the lead up to the Stanley Cup championship and well beyond. Your thoughts on CMAC pro scouting departments for the Avs?
Yeah, I share in that sentiment a lot. And so I feel bad because it feels like I'm keying in on Kevin's comments, like super specifically. This is not pointed in a personal way at you at all, Kevin. But I think first off the bat, Chris McFarland was involved with moves before wearing the title of GM more than people realize. And it's not something that I can provide like receipts for, but it is spoken about behind the scenes. Chris McFarland had a huge role in the acquisition of players like Lehkonen and Josh Manson and what he meant on that cup run.
Manson, so another great one.
I want to give him some credit because similarly to like the players that they've given up to acquire a Lehkonen or a Manson have not been close to what Lehkonen or Manson have provided this team. And in some ways, like maybe the Avs have saved themselves a little bit of headache and moving on from some of these players that ended up not hitting. And similarly, Lehkonen's role in Montreal was different. The Avs are able to see what he could be in the Avs system. And I go back to Jonathan Drouin and his opening 10 plus games of the season last year. People were ready to move on from him too. And unlike Middlestat, we didn't have the benefit of knowing Middlestat fit in this system because we saw after the deadline in the playoffs. With Drouin, we did not have that history, and we watched the GM move on from Tatar quickly. He saw something in Drouin, though, that was worth investing in, and it required a little bit of time and a hell of a lot of belief, and it ended up paying off. Now, I know the injury thing looms over his head a little bit this season, but it took Drouin a full season to really fit into what the Avs are doing. He had to grow as a player, too, to become that. And with Middlestat, I look at the role that he played in Buffalo, and he didn't always excel in it, but he still found a way to exist as a top six player solidly on a struggling Buffalo team that has only struggled more since he's left. And there's lots more reasons beyond just Middlestat's exit for that. But I think that's what gives me confidence that there's 2C upside in this player that is still young, unlike a Tatar or even a Drouin, who's a little more established in what he is. This is a player who's only just turned 26, and that's still pretty young for the position. I think there is expected growth then that is supposed to happen with like a Casey Middlestat. And then I look at some of these other names. For example, I think DeHaan is such an upgrade on the third pairing from what Jack Johnson and kind of Caleb Jones provided. I think we take for granted what that third pair looked like for like a season and a half, at least in Avs recent history. To me, this is so much an upgrade that I think maybe we've even gotten spoiled to where we're clamoring for more because we saw the Sean Walker acquisition at the deadline last year that I think that set this new expectation. And that was another piece of savvy business to move on from a Ryan Johansson that did not work. And of course, it meant giving up some draft capital to do it. But the Johansson thing was a gamble that didn't come at a huge expense to the Avs, though, because, you know, Nashville was retaining that salary. And so it was another one of those risks that wasn't much skin off the Avs' backs. And so it didn't pan out. There's no two ways about it. But I look at, sorry, I'm like a little bit all over the place, but I look at how they loaded up on the back end this year. It was so low risk. They moved on from Brandstrom quickly. They turned this into, you know, an LTIR move with Tucker Pullman, and they bring in a guy like Ludwig off waivers, who I don't even think they fully tapped into utilizing what he's capable of. Another like low risk could have medium reward. And back to the DeHaan of it all, right? I look at Parker Kelly even. That was a fourth line winger who has been playing as a 3C and one of your best penalty killers. I think we're underestimating the value that adds, especially in the absence of a player like Nichushkin and the ways in which Parker Kelly being better than we expected, because he was brought in to be a fourth line winger, just so we know. He, because of unfortunate circumstance to the Abs, has had to be more than that. And so he's not only done a fine job of that, it has possibly made a player like Miles Wood expendable, because now we are keying in on the 5v5 production of both players, and both can penalty kill very well. It's going to be a question of then, well, where is this money being utilized in the roster? I'm getting a little off topic here, but even a Kiviranta, another great penalty killer, having a better pro season with a little bit more time, because I thought he was lackluster last year. He really only came alive on my radar in the playoffs, Kiviranta, that is. But he's having a decent season where he's more than he was last year. And that just seems to be the Avalanche way, right? Like in rehabilitating players, like I'm not even just going to use the Nichushkin example, but Lehkonen being a full-time top six player that is relied upon in key moments in overtime, you know?
That was a guy that when they acquired him was a set and forget third liner, and he's on Team Finland next month. That's the step that Artturi Lehkonen has taken since he got to Denver. Sorry, I just want to drive that point home, that how far Lehkonen has come.
It's a great point. And so sometimes that growth takes a little bit of time. Like getting Drouin to be more of a two-way player is crazy. And Vaguely Silver brings up Ivan. You know, that's a part of their kind of amateur / pro scouting department, because that's a player who comes in from development camp on an AHL deal, turns it into an NHL one. He's still a little bit raw, and another that from unfortunate circumstance probably shouldn't be where he is today. But I even look at Parisi last year. I loved that acquisition. I'm so sad that it didn't bring him to a cup in his final season of hockey. But that fit was so good that I don't want to just breeze past some of these things because it didn't result in a cup last season.
Yep. No, I'm with you. And like I said, I didn't mean to derail us completely. But yeah, I just, like I said, I think both the comments that we just pulled up and talked about are fair criticisms, both of Casey Middlestat. And then, hey, yeah, you know, some of these moves haven't worked out. What's going on? But I do think when you dig in a little bit deeper on them, I think that the even under the official CMAC regime, even though he was a major player before, I think what he's done, what this pro scouting group has done, the good far outweighs the bad for me. Okay. Do you have anything else on the homestand? Because we are going to today's going to be a little bit of a quicker show, a little bit shorter. Do you have anything else from the homestand that you wanted to touch on before we shift focus to this 3-game Eastern swing that they've got coming up?
I want to defend my man Calvin DeHaan a little bit more. I'm seeing Kevin mention the plus minus of last season for Jack Johnson, and I think we need to understand how plus minus works as a stat and why it is a little bit flawed. The Avs started this year with horrific goaltending, unlike anything I've seen. And last year they had the benefit of a much sturdier, stable Georgiev, and the benefit of wins. It still wasn't Georgiev's best year by any stretch, but that's going to influence a plus minus stat when the goaltending starts this year so horrifically, and that's Calvin DeHaan's initiation to this Avalanche group. That's absolutely going to be a detriment to that stat. But when you dig into the 5v5 Corsi 4 percentage numbers of both players, Calvin DeHaan is better defensively. And Calvin DeHaan doesn't make the players he plays with worse. That was something unfortunate that became a trend of Jack Johnson and anybody that he played alongside. Those players were made worse defensively in being alongside him. Whereas with DeHaan, I'd actually venture to say like a player like Malinsky has excelled playing with DeHaan versus when he gets paired with like a Middleton. So I just want to give Calvin DeHaan some credit and emphasize that this is such an upgrade at the third pair, even though that this is a position that if Manson like continues to struggle, that I think they still need to add to their back end. I still think we're in a better spot with this third pairing than we're giving it credit for.
No, I'm with you. And I also think it's easy to remember the depth and the way the defense played and all that on the cup run, because it wasn't that long ago. And so it's easy to have that stick in your brain and have you like, well, no, that's the standard. And it's like, no, that was a team that was exceptional. That was a clear step ahead of the rest of the league. There's just no teams like that this year, with the results of or the impacts of the flat cap over the last almost half decade now, Megan. Cap went flat back in 2020. Okay, let's talk about it. They're in Boston tomorrow afternoon, then at the Garden, taking on the Rangers Sunday afternoon, before heading to Long Island to take on the Islanders on Tuesday. These are three teams that are all either bubble teams or on the outside looking in the East. Ross Colton mentioned to us just the other day that, yes, they've been home for a while and they're excited to get back on the road. And I believe he said be road warriors again. Megan, if you are the one setting the expectations in that room, what is your message to this team? What do they need to come away from this 3-game road trip with?
Just be less volatile. Like, you know how Logan O'Connor talks about A game, and if you can't bring the A game, bring the B game. The Avs have been going like A game, D game. And if it needs to be a B game, you know, if that's what feels best for them as a team, that's fine. Because the way that they won games over this homestand showed a lot of the impressive upside that exists with this group and having a player like Nathan MacKinnon at the top. But also, I go back to the goaltending for a second here. They are getting reliable goaltending every single night that gives them a strong chance to win, right? It's not even just a 1-goal difference. It's coming up with saves that not every goaltender is capable of. So I'm going to say that he doesn't necessarily have to keep them in games by a couple goals difference. And so I want to see them reward that too with responsible but passionate play. I think sometimes the games that have been lost for them have felt a little flat. And we talked about it on a previous episode as if they were maybe missing their why. I want them to have a why every game of this road trip. And the why should be turning this around and becoming a little bit more consistent, because you have greater aspirations than just making the playoffs. You want to win another Stanley Cup. And I think you have to play like that, even in the regular season, at least with that energy and that mindset. And you're gearing up for a 2-week break now. Not everybody's gearing up for a 2-week break, but a good amount of this Avs team is too. And so I want them to treat this not like the senioritis mindset of it's the last week of school, so I'm going to stop caring. I want to see you ace your finals and go into the summer without needing to take summer classes.
No, I think that's a great analogy. And I want to see them play the same or similar game 3 times. I want to see them string together 3 games where it's like, yeah, that met or exceeded expectations. Look, this is still an injured team. Like you said, we're gearing up for a 2-week break from the season. The schedule's condensed, all of that. I get it. I want to see them elevate their play tomorrow and then carry that forward for 3 games. One thing just real quick before this falls out of my brain, because people were talking about this on the show on Tuesday in the chat. They were saying, well, the Avs can't rely on their top guys getting rest because they'll be playing. Thankfully for the Avs, that is the case for every team in the NHL. The Four Nations tournament is only made up of NHL players. So if you have a high-end player on your team, as long as they're not Russian, you are going to have players who are going out and competing in this tournament. So it's pretty fair, pretty blanketed in terms of how things stack up. But no, I'm with you, Megan. I want to see, I don't need it to be 6-1 blowouts in every game, but I want to see the effort and the systematic structure on display in all 3 games in this road trip. And I think it's against 3 teams that you should be able to dig in and do that against.
I agree. When I look at some of the goals against, they were born from, like in this recent stretch, they were born from avoidable turnovers that are an execution issue. You know, it's not just lacking a finishing touch sometimes for the Avs, it's turning your brain on a little more completely. And so missing assignments or missing passes leading to turnovers, that is just a matter of like, wake up, drink your, I don't know, the like mushroom coffees and stuff that help your brain power. I don't know, drink your mushroom coffee, do what you got to do to get your focus a little bit more dialed in for these games. And honestly, this is something I thought about, and it's kind of inspired by a comment in the chat. But when they are home for 5 games and there's practices in between as well, they're dealing with a lot of media. They're dealing with a lot of buzz, a lot of outside noise. And we're not hard on these guys, but I do imagine that the break from the media and having only your team really to answer to with a little bit of media sprinkled in puts the focus back inside the team. It's kind of just them to answer to each other. And I think them going on the road right now is a really welcome thing.
Well, and Broncos season ended, so there's a lot more media in the room this last week. Hey, they're not getting away from all of us. Guerrilla Sports will be there in both cities in New York this week, bringing you guys all that coverage. But no, Megan, Cale Makar did use the phrase of, making sure you turn your brain on. And like you said, I don't know what they need to do. Maybe they need to stop at 7 Brew. 7 Brew coffee is a one-of-a-kind drive-through and walk-up experience with a fast and friendly crew that is waiting to serve you and help get your brain going. From rich, bold coffee to refreshing energy drinks, smoothies, teas, and more, 7 Brew has you covered. With over 20,000 flavor combinations, there's a perfect drink for everyone. At 7 Brew, they believe in cultivating kindness with every cup, and their fully customizable menu is just the beginning. Before you hit the road or the ice, power up with 7 Brew and Firestone and experience the coffee revolution. I want to go back to something that was in the chat. I'm going to take a quick little detour here again. From Tizzy 1986, just curious if either of you heard your peer, Arif's latest podcast. Big shout out to Arif Dean of Colorado Hockey Now, about Nate not doing post-game interviews and just deferring to Cale. Any concerns of leadership from your point of view? No. I don't have any concerns. Yes. Did you go up to Nate?
No, but no. I watched Nate linger by his stall while Cale was doing his availability. I thought on purpose. I thought Nate actually was preparing and bracing for media, but it turns out Arif had already gone to him to ask, and he said, no, like, go talk to Cale with everyone else. And so I saw it happen in a sense and talked with Arif a little bit about it afterwards. And I don't think this is a leadership issue. I don't love the position it puts Cale in. Because that locker room cleared out such that the only players we could talk to who were even still there were Nate, Cale, and Blackwood. And we've been talking to Cale and Blackwood every single game. And so this led to kind of a crazy situation. Totally a side story. Don't need to go down that road with like trying to get players to come back in the room. And there were players who were willing to come back. So I don't want this to reflect badly on the whole team. They were really disappointed with that loss. They got out of there quickly, but there was a willingness to come back in when asked. But Nate declining media isn't really new, and you kind of get a feel for when he will speak and won't speak. Like generally morning skates are not his thing. Get him at a practice day kind of a thing. Yeah. But that's really a media facing issue, right? It's not
right.
It doesn't bleed over into how he addresses his team or what kind of a role he plays as a leader there. If anything, it's a conversation for him and Cale, for Cale to be like, hey, I don't love this. I don't appreciate this.
Yeah. No, but like you said, I think that's also, look, it comes with the territory of playing with Nathan McKinnon. Not that you have to take his interviews, but that, he's going to be prickly and he's going to be angry. And I'm 100% certain Cale Makar was not surprised by that. And I doubt it was even a conversation after. It was, hey, no, Cale's already talking. Go jump in on that. There are players all the time after frustrating losses. I'm not going to call anybody out here. Last week, Megan, on this 5-game trip, there was a different player that we walked up to after the game, and they said no. As we started walking away, they kind of turned around. They're like, sorry, but no. Look.
We had, I felt bad about that one. Not bad, but there was an effort to make that polite. Like, the anger, you could just, it was radiating off of his body, but when addressing the media, you could tell he was trying to restrain himself from letting that project onto you. Like, it was not directed at you, just very frustrated with their own personal game. And I appreciate the attempt at politeness. And Kale, there was a game, I want to say it was the Edmonton game, where we wanted to talk to somebody, and Avs PR almost volunteered Kale, and we're like, no, we talk to him a lot. We don't need him specifically for this one.
Yeah,
he was willing.
There's a relationship between the players and the media and how all of that kind of works. And yeah, are there times it is media we would like it to go differently? Sure, in the same way that I'm 100% positive they feel the same way. But I just want to throw that out there. No, I don't have an issue with it in terms of leadership. I just think that's the way that Nate is, and his teammates know that and all that. Megan, we're going to round out today. We're going to talk about Miles Wood. I'm going to play the interview with him yesterday in the locker room, a couple minutes long. So I'm just going to play that. We'll talk a little bit about it, and then we'll get out of here for the day. So this is Miles Wood yesterday at practice, who is expected back into the lineup on this trip.
Miles, how you feeling?
Feel good right now. Yeah, it's good to be back with the guys.
You ready to get back on the ice?
I am, yeah. Been skating here for the last 2 weeks or so. I'll make the trip, so I'm excited about it.
Can you sort of walk us through what happened? Like, it was just sort of you were here and then you were gone, and what was...
I had back problems. Let's say that, yeah.
Is that something you dealt with before?
Yeah, right before playoffs last year, kind of dealt with it. And then the off season came and felt great because I wasn't playing hockey, and then just kind of sparked up again.
I know we always talk to the guys after they come back from injury, but how hard is it to kind of integrate back in with the team having missed as much time as you have?
Yeah, I've missed a lot. I missed a lot of time in the start of the season. 10 days or so, and then the last 2 months. So, yeah, it's been a lot of time. So, but I'm just happy to be back there with the guys.
How frustrating is it, working through a back injury, steps forward, steps backward, kind of letting it heal?
It's very frustrating because I thought it was healed, and then I tweaked it again, and then kind of went back to square one. So, hopefully I don't have to deal with that again.
I always ask this when a guy's coming back from injury, but do you feel like you learned anything watching from the sidelines about this group?
You just appreciate the game more. It can be taken away from you pretty quickly in this league. So probably just that, yeah.
Is this something you anticipate will be managed in your return to play, maybe with like limited or sheltered minutes?
I hope to be back 100%, but knowing back problems and talking to players that have dealt with the same thing, it's going to be something I'll have to take care of throughout probably the rest of my career.
And similarly, working with Toby Peterson to ramp back up to returning to play, what were some things that he helped you with to feel comfortable?
Just getting back into skating shape. I didn't skate there for like a month and a half, so you can be in great shape off the ice and in the gym, but it's a totally separate thing once you start playing hockey again.
Who was it that you connected with that had back pain?
Just players in the past that I played with. I'm not going to mention names, but there's a lot of guys in the league that have dealt with it, so yeah.
How connected have you stayed with the team during your recovery?
The month of December was tough. That was a brutal month for the team as a traveling. That was crazy. So it was tough, but January has been a little easier to see the guys day in and day out. So I'm trying to talk to them as much as possible.
Huge goaltending shift happens while you're out of the lineup. Can you tell me a little bit about what the impact from your goalpoint has been?
I've known Blackie since, probably 2013. Played with him in the A, played with him in Jersey for like 6 or 7 years. It's finding a good goaltender like that it's hard to find. It's like finding a quarterback in football. So I'm not sure why New Jersey traded him. Not sure why San Jose traded him, but sure as hell happy he's here. So.
So you knew what to expect with his personality coming into this room, and how it would change the dynamic of the team, maybe?
Yeah, he's an outstanding athlete, outstanding friend. He's a hell of a talent.
Thanks, Miles. Appreciate it.
A glowing review of Mackenzie Blackwood there at the end. But there's one thing in there in particular, Megan, that I want to unpack. And it was your question. You said, is this something that'll impact you in your return to play, whether it be sheltered minutes, game management, things like that? Miles would acknowledge that this injury he's dealing with is probably just with him now for the rest of his career and something he'll have to manage. Given the length of this contract, is that something that gives you concern, Megan?
I immediately thought of Eric Johnson, and I am not suggesting that's at all who he was talking about, because there's at least 2 players I can think of that he's played with that have dealt with back issues that relate to a disc issue. And with Eric Johnson coming to mind, I remember that this was something that could creep back up kind of at random times. I remember it with Eric Johnson more earlier in his career than I do with the end of it. And I look at another player like Nolan Foote, who has missed time as a result of disc issues similarly. And I remember last year, Miles Wood randomly missed a game, and he had said it's something that he deals with like once a year, and it was all back to good. And didn't really hammer him harder on that one, but that's what also came to mind, is like, if it's something that has crept back in and maybe is a game off here and there, it gives me less concern. But obviously whatever happened this year, the way in which it was tweaked led to almost 2 months of an absence. So I don't know enough about the issue to weigh in on it very intelligently, but my hope is that length of time is to ensure really good, proper recovery to set him up for success, so that if this did bother him again, maybe it is only the game off. I'm to speculate, that's what happened last year.
All right, got a couple super chats to wind down today. $1.99 from Vaguely Sober. Safe trip, Jesse. Feel better, Megan. New website. Yes, I was in a new website meeting this week. It is coming, folks, and I'm really excited. I think everyone's really going to like it. It's going to be a lot more. Here we go. We got the super chat lights here in the studio. So yes, new website is coming. Thank you, Vaguely. And then $5 from Mike Peterson. Appreciate you guys and the info and content, and cue the super chat lights again. $5 from Mike Peterson. We appreciate you. We appreciate all of you guys for stopping in today. Mike, Vaguely, thank you guys very much for the super chats as always.
Mike was wondering when our show hadn't started at 1:30, and so I'm glad to see you made it to our 2:30 show, Mike.
Yes, sorry. We with Megan, we had to move some things around. I had some meetings I had to be in and stuff, but hey, we make things happen. That's what we do here at Gorilla. When is the next pyramid? Coming very soon. We were originally supposed to actually nail down the time and date today for the next pyramid, but we got a lot of injuries here at Gorilla Sports Off Ice. Chloe's been out for a whole week. Megan day to day. So we were supposed to get that ironed out, but it's coming very soon. The new pyramid is on its way. Like I said, I'll be in New York. Won't be in Boston tomorrow, but I will be in New York for Avs Rangers, Avs Islanders, and we should have a special post-game edition of Off Ice coming to you guys on Tuesday. Me in Long Island, Megan right here in the studio. Looking forward to it. But what else? Final thoughts from you, Megan?
We were targeting next Friday, so that'll be around game 52, 3. So we'll miss the 50 mark exact, but we'll reflect on the last 10 game segment still. And if I remember, Stacey mentioned there's a lot you can do for disc stuff. I think with Eric Johnson, what helped to alleviate it was going to a chiropractor. So my hope is that Miles Wood just has a new regimen as a result of this that helps keep this at bay.
we will be monitoring it closely. She is Meghan Angley. I'm Jesse Montano. Thomas behind the glass today, making the lights work, making the intros roll. Make sure you guys can see us and hear us. Always got to give love to our producers. Big shout out to Thomas. Thank you guys so much. We'll be back at it with more content over the weekend, and then back at it with shows on Monday. Thanks so much, everybody. We will talk to you guys soon. Have a good one.